Hi there, and welcome to my Pathfinder guide for Tainted Grail Conquest. I'm Icon, and this video will guide you through all the necessary knowledge to do some serious damage with this class and conquer your foes. I'm going to talk about the general playstyle, strengths and weaknesses, and what you need to know to fight properly and draft some decent choices. So let's get started and face some enemies here. I'm going to go through two example fights. It's all something like that. Well, maybe it's going to be 3 example fights then, and going to explain how the character class works, and then we're going to get through the perks and the cards in the way there, and get back into the village to talk about gear in the end. So, the Pathfinder gains extra damage for every turn he didn't take damage. He gains ultimate charges for every time he plays a stance card, and the ultimate skill will give you cards and energy. The more charges you have, the more of each respectively. So this translates into a playstyle where you want to delay your actions as much as possible, and then ideally let loose a fully charged ultimate when you have the necessary amount of damage bonus to kill your enemies in one go. That's the theory. So in practice, we can do things in combination with the insight skill, which will always duplicate the next stance card played. This is really awesome because this way we can duplicate our blocks, which means we can create 2 blocks out of 1 card, which makes our starting hand a lot more efficient and generates a way more guaranteed way of gaining blocks whenever you need them. Very important for a defensive class. So insight and block generates 2 block units. It also generates 2 charges for your ultimate meter. Of course, this wasn't necessary because this guy doesn't even want to attack this turn. But you also have Onslaught in your armament, which is an attack which deals 50% more damage per block you have, which is a really decent thing to know. So when we're now avoiding damage, we get the focus skill. And this stacks with itself. Each turn you do not receive any damage. So the longer we can uphold this, the better. So there's also a stun in our armament. This will be not duplicated by insight. So insight and stun is not a good combo. It's just not. Let's just nuke away this guy because he's not really an enemy for our build, and let's talk about drafts for a moment. When you want to draft up cards, always take care that you have some extra block opportunities because the basic blocks don't really cover it. At least draft 1 or 2 cool ways for blocking opportunities, like here Deep Breath, generating block and a cost reduction for the next turn is a pretty neat thing to go for. Let's re-roll that. And also very important to know or to draft is that you pick up cards which have a higher base damage than 100%, because stacking up damage percent numbers is really efficient for this character class. And also what's really important to know is that AoE attacks are really important to counter tanks, because enemy tanks suffer a lot from attacks which attack all enemies, because if there are 4 enemies, the tank will get hit 4 times by one of these attacks. So we're going to take the spikes throw because, well, this is quite important to bust down tanks. Passive skill wise, it's like with all the classes, pick what fits to your playstyle. I really want to emphasize that maximum damage increasers, in general, extra damage is always appealing to you. The more damage you have, the more chances you have to take down things. And also starting combats with extra cards, or extra cards in general, are really powerful because as a defensive deck, you can't afford a single turn where your defenses are low. So extra cards are really good. But I also really like things like perks which counteract larger numbers than yours, so we're going to take confidence here, because this gets me to the next point. A weakness of the Pathfinder class are enemy packs which are full of different and numerous enemies. Like everything above 2 is already considered to be more difficult. The Pathfinder loves encounters which have 1 to 2 enemies, which are easy to keep under control, but everything above 3 is really hard and difficult for this class. So if you can, avoid these combats. But there are a few things worth to know when fighting multiple enemies. And here we go. We have 2 healers here in this scenario and 1 damage dealer. When it goes down like this, the easiest way is for me always just pick up as many blocks as you really need. Don't overstack with blocks, and take down 1 enemy at a time to make the combat as easy as possible. Focus on single enemies and try not to spread out your damage onto several enemies. That's really not effective at all. So here we go for the double block and then onslaught into our enemy. We see here with the growing focus, my attacks grow stronger and stronger. The enemies buff themselves here a bit. So, for example, this skill here is for me not really viable at this point. We're going to take only 1 block and focus our single target damage on this 1 target as much as we can. This won't charge up my ultimate as much as I need to, but the ultimate charges are ideally stacked up as a preference if you're up against 1 large and hefty enemy where you want to pump in as much damage as possible in one go. So, speaking about enemies and damage, here we go. And as you see, my attacks are growing stronger and stronger while I'm avoiding all the damage. And multi-attacking enemies are another thing which is worth to be mentioned, because this is the 3rd and last weakness of the Pathfinder, which is you need 1 block per attack, and that's where stun comes in really handy as well. But another alternative is just to outright slay your enemy before he can do that. So we're going to spread out some damage, and in this scenario I might not need the block, but I'll still do it for getting more charges up. If there's no good benefit from keeping unused energy, always use up all your energy. There's literally nothing to gain from not doing so. So only 1 block for me, and then keep attacking. Let's spread some small strikes. They benefit very much from the stacking of focus as well. And here we go. 6 stacks of focus now. Everything hits like a truck at this point, and this is where we want to be. Alright, this sums up the Pathfinder's playstyle pretty much. You want to try to keep your enemies under control and deal as much damage as possible meanwhile. So we're going to check out what's here. Yeah, energy cost reducers are also one thing which is really attractive for this class, because you feature, ideally you want to have a couple of blocks, a couple of utility cards to bust down tanks, reduce armor, and a couple of energy cost decreasers, and a couple of nukes to pump out these nukes properly. For example, here, deal 4 hits for 100% damage is meh, but there's also, well, okay. There are cards which feature 200 or 300% damage, and these are single target nukes, which are really useful and effective for the Pathfinder to blow down bosses. One of the big mistakes you could do is to stack up too many low damage skills like you see here, because as a Pathfinder you want to have skills which outright kill an enemy. Because there's one really useful thing to know. If you are, like, after 3 or 4 turns not being scratched at all, you can just nuke away the enemy which tries to kill you, attack you 4 times or something like that, instead of investing into blocks. So this sums up the battle behavior. The last thing that I didn't manage to bring up here, or well, let's see if I find one here, are tanks. Tanks are really nasty because they give you, or well, we don't have tanks here at this point, because they will bundle up their damage on one person where you don't want to have the damage. One thing I wanted to emphasize, if there is an enemy tank which redirects all the damage on himself, stun will still not be redirected towards the tank. Even if the stun is connected to an attack, like there are attacks which are like deal damage and stun the target. It would be like the stun applies to the actual target, the damage will get redirected to the tank. Very, very important when facing tanks, because this way you can stun the damage dealer, which intends to, I don't know, attack you 5 times. Instead of racking up endless blocks, a stun shuts down this thing perfectly. Okay, I think we have talked enough about the combat. Let's get back to the actual equipment and armor situation in the village. For the Pathfinder, it is really important to have a certain set of stats. Hey, Mr. Blacksmith, where are you? Here. As a character class which builds up its damage over time, the runestones which have only effects during the first turns of a combat are a double-edged thing. My favorite example is the Tear rune, which gives you extra armor during the beginning of a combat or extra damage during the beginning of a combat. Tear is absolutely underwhelming as a weapon choice, but as an armor choice, it's really a cool thing, because quite often I were unable to defend myself against the enemies in the first turns of a fight when I didn't have ultimate charges online, when there are 4 enemies attacking me all at once. I really noticed that this rune was really useful to mitigate a lot of damage, especially since when you upgrade it, the amount of turns it gives its bonus prolongs. Pretty cool for the armor slot. But apart from that, the preferences of the Pathfinder are pretty straightforward. Extra damage is just insanely good because you stack percentile bonuses to your damage, so increasing your baseline damage is just thumbs up. Big stuff. For the same way, the same thing applies to reduction of enemy armor, because I didn't emphasize it really strongly in the previous part of the video, but high stacked armor on enemies is a pretty nasty thing for the Pathfinder as well. So this is an interesting choice too, but I really like to use the Stan runes for the max HP bonus, because I personally like my Pathfinder being very beefy and brawny, because sometimes there are situations where you won't be able to tank or to block everything. It's just impossible to block everything at all times. And having a high baseline HP pool makes these little mistakes a lot more forgiving. And I really like the max HP in combination with the extra healing after each combat. This gives you, if you have 2 slots unlocked, a pretty high resilience build which forgives you little mistakes. Take these runes if you are facing the problem quite often that your block chain breaks. Then the healing after combat or the max HP increases are pretty good. Apart from that, there's another rune which isn't shown here. Let's do this here while we're at it. Here, each card played increases your damage by 5%. This was the one I wanted to talk about. This rune, I have mixed feelings about it, because it is quite useful if you pull it up like first you put up your blocks and then you attack afterwards. There's a decent use to that. But, well, it depends on your draft. There are drafts which prefer to build up their blocks after attacking. So if you build up your draft like that, the Ethel rune is really not cool as a weapon slot. But in 90% of the cases, Ethel is also a really good choice, because, you know, stacking up percentile bonuses, like I said. And in the armor slot, I personally don't like armor bonus things for the Pathfinder too much, because he's so good at stacking up blocks that I'm more like, well, avoidable. But on the other hand, it is a strong thing to pick up, so you could consider it as well. And for the seamstress upgrades, I want to mention here again, increasing damage at the seamstress is, of course, I mentioned it often enough, I think. And then goes max HP and then armor in my personal preferences. So I hope that was helpful for you. This ends up my tutorial for this character class. This is, of course, a beginner's crash course for this class. There's a lot of depth to it, and the more often you play it, the more things you unlock. And if you struggle with picking it up, just keep playing. You will unlock more and more really cool options which will solve problems for you which you have faced before. So drop your comments down below, leave a like or a subscribe on my channel if you want to see more content like that. I do daily videos, just turn on those notifications and you won't miss anything in the future. Also in the description below you'll find a link to my Discord server where a really nice and friendly community has its home, and you can also hang there for a chat with me if you want to. So I want to point out down there are also links for financial support, so any tips or helping hands would be more than awesome, but the biggest support is of course you watching these videos. End of the advertisement block. Thank you so much for your time, enjoy gaming, and see you soon. Bye bye.